We all like to believe that when we are home behind our shut and locked doors and shut and locked windows, tucked away inside of our bedroom under our covers, that we're safe, that our family members in their bedrooms, they're all safe. But in reality, that's not true. Most of the time it is, and most of the time that illusion of safety is enough that you don't think about it very often, that someone actually could probably break into your house if they wanted to. Not all houses. Some people are much more prepared than others. But most people never have to worry about that actually becoming a reality, someone breaking into their home. But there are people that do live that nightmare when the place they look at as safe becomes unsafe. Today's story is about someone who believed they lived in a safe house, in a safe neighborhood. But in a moment's notice, that illusion was shattered. Before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious told in story format, well, then you've discovered the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that's your style and you might be interested in something like that, I would encourage you to please gently incinerate, keep it together, here we go. Please gently incinerate the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of those weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 2017, a woman had just moved in to a beautiful home in Northern California that was just outside the suburbs. It was in kind of a more rural area. There wasn't any street lights. She did have neighbors, but they were, pretty far away from where she was actually staying, but she loved it. And it was this beautiful area. She'd go outside at night on her porch and she'd look up, and because there wasn't much light pollution, she could see the stars, and she just loved it. And even though she didn't see her neighbors very often, she knew them. They were older. They were really nice. It was just like a really warm, welcoming neighborhood, albeit people enjoyed their space, but it was safe. And it was a place that she truly loved and didn't expect to move anytime soon. Later that year, in the winter, she got home from work one day. She had a long shift. She was exhausted, and she pulls into her driveway, and when she steps out, she immediately smelled cigarette smoke. She didn't smoke. She didn't think her neighbors smoked. It was not a high-trafficked area. They're in kind of this rural part of Northern California. And her street, the only people that really ever went on it were her and her neighbors. And so she was thinking, who was smoking near my house? But it was really, really foggy this day. She could barely see, even when she was pulling into her driveway, she could only see what her headlights had illuminated on her house. It was no visibility. She kind of glanced around, but she was like, you know what? I'm so tired. I just want to go to bed. So she just kind of forgets about the cigarette smoke, wasn't really that concerned about it, and goes in her house. And even though it's 7 o'clock, she's like, I'm just going to go to bed. So she heads upstairs, takes a shower, and gets in bed. A couple hours later, she wakes up because she thinks she hears something on her first floor. At the time, she had a close friend that was taking classes in the city, but working outside of the city, and sometimes didn't have enough time to get back to his house to shower and clean up before work. And so she'd actually given him a set of her keys so that at odd hours, when he was going between classes and work, he could just come to her house, take a shower, get changed. It was just a lot easier for him, and they were close enough, it wasn't a big deal. But he always texted her before he came to her house as a courtesy. Hey, I'm going to be there taking a shower, using your house just for a minute. And they rarely actually ran into each other because his hours were so strange. So when she wakes up and hears commotion downstairs, the first thing she does is check her phone for a text message because she's assuming that it's her friend who's just, stopped by to use the shower or change or whatever he's going to do. So she reaches over to her bedside table, grabs her phone, and she opens it, and it blinded her because she's just woken up, and she kind of squinted at her phone, and she couldn't really tell if there was any unread messages from him or not, but she just put her phone down and decided she would yell out, just a lot faster than trying to read this text message. So she yells out to him, and there's silence downstairs. And she yells out again, hey, is that you? And there's silence. And then all of a sudden she hears very loud footsteps running across the first floor, charging up the stairs. She instinctively leaps out of bed, runs into her closet, which is right across from her bed. And as soon as she's literally stepping into the closet, she can hear whoever was downstairs now is in the hallway upstairs. And so the layout upstairs is there's a bedroom on the left, a bedroom on the right of the hallway, and straight ahead at the end, there's a bathroom. And the 2 bedroom doors were shut. The bathroom door was open. This person bombed up the stairs and ran right past the bedroom doors, one of them she was in, straight to the bathroom. It allowed her an opportunity to pop open the attic crawl space that the access was inside of her closet. She pops that open and is able to clamber up into the attic, and is literally, her feet are still being sucked up into the attic as whoever that was, they realize she's not in the bathroom and they started charging back down. They punch open the door that she's in and they charge into her bedroom. She's trying to suck her legs up into the attic crawl space. She gets him up just in time and has her knees sucked up against her chest when he comes into her bedroom, flips on the light, and opens the closet. From her vantage point, she's looking down, and just because of the way the view was obscured, she could only make out that it was someone wearing like kind of tattered jeans with the cuffs rolled up and dirty work boots. This was definitely not her friend. And as she's looking at his shoes and pants, wondering if he's gonna poke his head in and look up and see this crawl space where she is, and she has nothing she can do. If he decided to reach up and get her, there's nowhere for her to go. She didn't have her phone, it was on the bedside table, and she's just hoping that he doesn't see her. Luckily, he turns around and starts rummaging through everything in her bedroom, basically looking for her. Flips the bed over, knocks over the dresser, and then he screams this loud scream of frustration. And as he's screaming, she pushes the little crawl space cover over the spot. So now she's completely tucked away inside of the crawl space and she can't see anything. And for the next several hours, this person was literally screaming and running around the house, punching walls, screaming, "Where are you?" Running down the hall, reopening the bathroom, going into the other bedroom, clearly knocking things over, just going crazy looking for this girl. And then it slowed down and she heard him walking around the house, and he would say periodically,
"Gonna find you. No, you haven't left yet. I'm gonna find you."
And she started smelling cigarette smoke. He was smoking inside of her house, and then she realized that he was probably at her house when she first got in. That's why she smelled the cigarette smoke. For hours, she huddled inside of this attic crawl space that realistically is a little bit obscured inside of the closet. You would need to be looking for it to see it. And she just hoped that he didn't find her. And so she started counting. She figured, if I can just count to 1,000 with silence downstairs, if I can do that, that means he's probably gone. And so she would start counting, and she'd get to like 200, and then she'd hear him whispering or yelling or knocking something over, and she'd go back down to 0. And so all night, she basically would try to count to 1,000 until finally she did, without it being interrupted. It was probably like 5 or 6 in the morning. So it's been hours and hours of this guy looking for her in her house. And she believed that it was safe enough for her to open up the attic crawl space and kind of peek back into the room. And so she moves the attic crawl space, the little square piece of wood that blocks the crawl space, she lifts it up and moves it. And she can now see that just from her little vantage point to where his feet were, that she could see before, that clearly things have been broken. There's glass on the ground. She can see there's clothes on the ground. And she wriggles down. There's no sign of him. It's been a while since she heard him. And she darts across her now destroyed bedroom. Her bed's been flipped. Things have been broken. There's holes in the wall. She gets her phone and goes right back in the crawl space. She calls the police and is like whispering as she's talking to them, because now she's worried that maybe he heard her and he's going to come back. She really doesn't know if he's gone. She just knew she had to call the police. Otherwise, she was dead if he was still there. She gets the police on the phone. They say, "We'll be right there. Stay where you are." The police show up and she can hear them entering the house. They're yelling, "Police, we're coming inside." They search the whole house and they start yelling for her. They start yelling for her by name. And at this point, she feels comfortable opening up the crawl space and coming down to show herself. Sure enough, there's the police and they're like, "There's nobody here. Do you want to walk around the house and see if anything was taken?" Every room was completely trashed. Holes in the wall, things broken. Whoever this was looking for her everywhere in the house and was basically rummaging through everything to try to find her. And the police are like, "You're very lucky that you thought to jump into that crawl space, because we found a number of your knives from your butcher block have been taken out. They were scattered around the house. It seems like he might have grabbed a knife and then in frustration was maybe looking for you and slashing at different things. Then he'd throw a knife and get another one. It's pretty clear this person was trying to do you harm, and you're very lucky that you had the wherewithal to immediately, when you heard those running footsteps, charge into the closet and hide in the attic. That almost definitely saved your life. Although she would stay at this house for another 3 years after the incident, it ultimately proved to be too difficult to stay in that house. She was constantly afraid that it was going to happen again. It was very traumatic, and so she ultimately moved. So it just goes to show that while we believe we are safe when we are home, the reality is all those locks and cameras and all the stuff we install around our house to keep ourselves safe, that's really just to keep the honest people out. The monsters out there, the evil people that want to do us harm, they don't care about breaking windows and forcing their way in. So you should always have a plan of what you would do if someone broke into your home, how you would handle it, whether it is an escape plan or even concealed weapons. But you should do something to protect yourself and have a plan in case the worst case scenario happens to you. So that's going to do it, guys. If you enjoyed the story today, if you would please gently incinerate the like button and then also subscribe and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss my 3 to 4 weekly uploads. If you want to reach out to me, you can hit me up on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok. My handle is MrBallen, and I go live on TikTok at 10 p.m. Eastern, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I hope to see you there, and thank you all for supporting the channel, and I will talk to you soon. Every year, dozens of people, hikers, hunters, backpackers, will go off into the wilds of North America and then come out again claiming to have seen Bigfoot, the 8 to 10 feet tall, intelligent, bipedal, hairy creature that kind of is a cross between man and beast. And there's literally been thousands of sightings of that particular creature all over North America. And despite the thousands of sightings, there's never been a substantiated claim, so Bigfoot has become an urban legend. But no matter how you feel about Bigfoot, whether it exists or it doesn't, if you read through some of the first-hand accounts of these people who claim to have seen Bigfoot in North America, some of them are horrifying. And one account that stands out to me as being the most terrifying comes out of Oregon. There's a couple hot spots all over North America where some of the most sightings of Bigfoot occur, and one of them is in Oregon. In particular, it's the northwestern section of Oregon. And that's where today's story is going to come out of, and it is Jeff Boiler's story. Jeff was a Marine. He was then a police officer. Then he became a deputy sheriff, and then he ultimately became a lawyer. What really stands out to me about Jeff's story is that he strikes me as a credible, skeptical guy who, when interviewed, because he's been on a TV show called Paranormal Witness on the Sci-Fi Channel, he did a follow-on interview. He's you can Google him, Jeff Boiler's Bigfoot sighting. The way he tells the story, it's like he's not trying to dress it up. He's not trying to make it more dramatic than it really was. It's like he's just telling you what happened to him. And he's not trying to create a theory as to what it was, but rather just, here it is. Here's what happened, as I remember it. And it allows you to listen to this story and really relate to it. And it makes it that much more eerie as you listen to what happened to him. And so today I'm going to be telling Jeff's story. But before I get into that, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, delivered in story format with lots of distracting hand gestures, then you have come to the right place, because that is all I do, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week. So if that's something you'd be into, I would ask you to please gently disembowel the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into the story. Back in 1997, Jeff Boiler was a fit, single guy that had been in the Marine Corps for a little while, and then he'd been a police officer, and now he was looking to do something new with his life, and he had always been a huge fan of nature. He loved hiking and hunting, and so he just kind of up and decided to move to Oregon to just be back in nature. And so he goes out to Oregon. He doesn't really know what he's going to do for a job. One of Jeff's friends, who is the elected sheriff of a very rural county in northwestern Oregon, reached out to Jeff and said, hey, with your background, you were in the Marine Corps, you were a police officer, would you want to be one of our deputy sheriffs out here in northwestern Oregon? And Jeff's like, wow, great. and took the job. So after being on the job for a couple of months, Jeff is really happy. He loves his job, and he gets off one day from work pretty early, and he steps outside, and he would recall that it was like one of the most beautiful days he had seen in recent memory. It was just this gorgeous day. And even though initially he was planning to just go home, he was like, you know what? I'm gonna go on a hike. He wanted to go to this fairly hard to access section of the woods that was a little ways up the mountain where 20 years earlier he had actually buried one of his very close friends. And so he thought, you know what? Today I'm gonna make that trip up to his grave. I'm gonna pay my respects. That's a good way to spend such a beautiful day. So he hopped in his Jeep and he started driving over to the woods that would take him up to this gravesite. It was an unmarked trail, but he had a map. He knew where it was, so he headed over. Now, Jeff was highly competent in the wilderness, but it needs to be said that he was basically going to be hiking into a section of the Cascade Mountains that was unmarked. This is a very isolated, unmarked area. And in fact, Jeff would even say that sometimes when you would walk around this section of the Cascade Mountains, you would wonder to yourself, has anyone ever been here before? Like, this is such a wild and open expanse. Am I the first person to ever step foot here? It's a section of Oregon that is totally just wild. So Jeff arrives at the dirt lot that's right on the edge of this forest that goes up the side of this mountain. And before he steps in and starts making his way up, he gets his map out and he kind of roughly charts a course. Because again, there's no trail in here. He puts his map away and he begins walking up this mountain. He's been walking for about 2 hours and the terrain's really bad. And he decides, you know what, why don't I deviate from the course that I was on and try to get to a more open area that might be able to kind of bank around to get up to the gravesite. He looked on the map and he could see that parallel to where he was going up this mountain, there seemed to be a strip of clearing where it might be easier going. It would require a bit of work to get over to it, but once he was there, he believed he could get up to the gravesite. So before he makes that movement over to the clearing, there was a stream running right next to him, freshwater stream. And so he just bends down, he splashes some water on his face, he gets a drink. And before he actually starts moving towards this clearing, because now he's deviating from the path that he intended to take. And this is an unmarked trail. So he knew that he would need to be really certain where he was going. He didn't have a GPS. This is 1997. He just had his map and compass. So he pulls out his map one more time. He looks at where he needs to go. He closes it up. And so he pulls out his compass and he takes what's called an azimuth, which basically is a way to make sure you're going in the right direction. And so he pulls the compass up to his eye. And as he's looking, he sees just to the right of his viewpoint, about 20 feet above him, there is a tree and a boulder. And behind that tree, someone is watching him. And so he lowers his compass and he just kind of glances over. And he can tell that it's clearly a figure. It's got two eyes in its head and it's looking at him. And he's not immediately scared. He thinks that this is a person who's kind of poking their head around a tree at him. And it's daylight. He knows he's out in the middle of nowhere, but he's looking up at it. And he involuntarily cocks his head, like, huh? And this thing cocks its head. It's mimicking me. It steps out from behind the tree, and it's this huge, human-looking figure that looks very hairy. It's like 8 foot tall. And Jeff's looking up at it like, that's not a human. And so, not really sure what it is, he instinctively reaches for a sidearm, but he can't get it out of its holster. And he's like fumbling with it, and he's keeping his eyes on this thing that's, maybe 50 feet away from him, 20 feet up on this rocky outcropping. He can't get it out. And the figure's just looking down at him, and it's still got its head cocked to the side. He finally looks down to free his pistol. He draws the pistol, but the creature's gone. And he's like, I gotta get a better look. There was a tree that was pretty high that had a bunch of low branches that he could climb up. That would, if he climbed up maybe 15 or 20 feet, he could probably look over into this rocky outcropping. So he starts climbing up this tree, and he looks, and he's now level with that rocky outcropping, and he's looking out, and it stretches off quite a ways. There's a whole stretch of forest right there. And he's looking, and he can't see or hear anything. And he's starting to wonder to himself, like, did I really just see that? Is my mind playing tricks on me? Am I hallucinating? And so he decides, you know what? I'm going to climb back down and I'm going to go up onto that rocky outcropping. Wasn't planning to, but now I'm going to, and I want to see if I can see some tracks or just see where this thing went. He's a Marine. He was a police officer. He was very comfortable in the wild. He just didn't really scare that easily. And so he's just kind of curious. And he's armed, you know? And so he climbs down the tree and he starts climbing up this like little rocky outcropping, and he gets up to where this creature was hiding. There's nothing there. There's no scent, there's no anything. And he just decides, you know what? I'm just gonna walk in the general direction that I think this thing went. Because where he was, which was this rocky outcropping, it kind of dead-ended because it's like a cliff. So he could pretty much only go inland and up this mountain. And so he just starts walking. And as he's walking, he's looking for, you know, signs that he could potentially attribute to this creature. He's listening really intently, but there's nothing. After about an hour, he's looking at the map and he's looking around at the terrain, and he's like, I think I'm lost. Like, I need to turn around now. And then it dawns on him that he's also lost track of time. It's starting to get pretty dark out, and he does not have a flashlight. So he starts to panic a little bit because he realizes that his curiosity has now put him in a very dangerous situation. He doesn't have supplies to stay the night. He doesn't have a flashlight. It's getting late, and he's potentially lost. So he tries to compose himself, and he just says, okay, I'm just going to turn around and walk back, because he hasn't seen any indication of this creature or this person or whatever it is. So he turns around and he starts backtracking as best as he can. And as soon as he starts moving back, from behind him, he hears what sounds like a very large tree break and smash into the ground. And he described it as being louder than most guns. Like, it's an extremely loud sound. And he turns around and he looks, and there's nothing there. But he just figured, that's crazy. Like, I'm lucky that no tree landed on me. He's not thinking that could be, you know, Bigfoot. He's thinking that a tree just fell and I'm lucky it didn't land on me. And so now, even though he is not connecting the falling tree with this creature or person he saw, he's in a bit of a panicked state. And so he can't help but associate the experiences. And so he finds himself, as he's walking now a little bit faster and faster away from where he just was, looking over his shoulder in the direction of where that tree fell and where he believed this creature or person was. And as he's walking, you know, looking ahead where he needs to go, but then peering over his head, over his shoulder, over and over again, he hears another loud snap and fall, and it stops him dead in his tracks. It was ahead of him, off to the right, basically on the exact opposite side of where he had come from. And he's thinking to himself, you know, in all the time that I've spent in the woods, it's so rare to be around a tree suddenly falling, unless it's being caused by another tree falling or some other event. It's rare that you would hear two large trees break and fall independent from one another in the same small area but not connected. That's pretty rare. And he's thinking to himself, if that creature or person had anything to do with it, how did it go from over there to all the way over there without me hearing it? It's moving around without me being able to spot it. And so the hair on the back of his neck stands up, and he's starting to feel very uncomfortable. He's being hunted. And so he keeps on walking the path, but begins to veer off away from the second snap that he heard. He figures, I'm just going to split the difference and kind of go a little bit to the left and avoid that falling tree, still keep my distance from this falling tree, and just get down the mountain as quickly as I can. And so as he starts moving in this kind of slightly new direction, he hears a third falling tree. And now it's back on his left side, closer to that first one he heard, except it's closer to him now. He turned around and he couldn't see the result of a large tree falling. He certainly heard it, but he's looking and he can't see anything. And he's thinking to himself, like, 3 falling trees, that is not innocent. Something is knocking over these trees. And I think it's that creature I saw. And even worse is he's thinking to himself, is this creature using these trees to signal to other creatures where he is? Is he being tracked? It's getting closer to him without giving away its own position. He really believed he was being hunted. And so he starts sprinting down the mountain. And as he's running, he's hearing snap, fall, snap, fall. These massive trees are being knocked down on his left and his right side, like you have 2 hunters basically following him, or it's the same one that apparently can move around in the wilderness without being spotted. And he is absolutely terrified. He's running down the mountain, he's falling, he's getting smashed up every time he falls. And he finally, after about 30 minutes of just running straight downhill with these crashes getting closer and closer and closer to him, he reaches this clearing. And he stops abruptly because there's an animal in the middle of the clearing, and it's a deer. And the deer doesn't seem fazed by Jeff. The deer sees Jeff, looks behind Jeff, just off to his side, and it tilts its head back and then turns and sprints away. It wasn't running from Jeff. It was running from whatever was right behind Jeff. And Jeff stops, and he starts turning his head in the direction of where the deer was looking, and he can't see anything. And as he's looking, another tree slams, smashing down right behind where he was. He takes off sprinting. He knows he's maybe a half mile from his car at this point. And now, as he's sprinting through this field, all he hears is just a cascade of these crashing trees as he sprints the final stretch to his car. He pulls out his key and he starts clicking the automatic locks, and he can't tell if it's working. And he's panicking that it's not going to work in time, and he's going to get to his car and it's going to be locked. And he's fumbling with his keys to open the door, and now the crashing has all stopped. And he's just waiting for this thing to jump out and grab him. He manages to open his car, jumps inside, slams it, starts it up, and peels out of there. And then he went back to his office where his sheriff was, and he told him what happened, and he felt ridiculous telling him. And his sheriff was like, I get reports like this all the time. This side of the Cascade Mountains, in that very remote section that you were in, we get reports like that all the time. I believe you. If you want to file a report, go for it, but chances are good it's never going to be followed up with. This is just a phenomenon of being out here in the wilderness. Some people believe it, some people don't. Decades would go by and he would finally share his story, which is why we're hearing about it now. But when he tells that story, if you watch it on Paranormal Witness, you're listening to it like it happened yesterday. This has stuck with this man, and it's clear it had a profound impact on his life. So while there's never been any substantiated claims of Bigfoot actually existing, some of these reports are eerily similar to one another, and some of the people detailing these sightings are people like Jeff, who really has no reason to lie or embellish. He doesn't really stand to gain much. In fact, he stands to lose, because he could be labeled as kind of like a kook for believing that Bigfoot chased him. So the way I like to look at stuff like this is just to keep an open mind. We don't know half the stuff that's in our ocean. You know, we barely know anything in the universe. What's to say that there isn't some creature like Bigfoot that's managed to evade, legitimate proof that it exists? I think it's certainly possible. It doesn't mean that I fundamentally believe it's true. It just means that I retain an open mind. But I want to know what you think chased Jeff through the woods. Was it Bigfoot? Was it something else? Or was this just some hoax? And if it was a hoax, are all the other sightings hoaxes too? And if you haven't already, if you enjoyed this story, if you would please gently disembowel the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss my 3 to 4 weekly uploads of stories that are like this, strange, dark, and mysterious. So thank you all very much for tuning in. I look forward to reading your comments. If you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. Or you can check me out on TikTok, where I'm quite active. My handle is MrBallen, and I go live on TikTok at 10 p.m. Eastern, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I hope to see you there, or on Instagram, or right here on YouTube. Thank you all for checking out my channel and for watching my video, and for sticking it out till the very end. Until next time, see ya. Many people have claimed over the years to have been abducted by aliens, and realistically, there's no tangible evidence that any human being has ever actually set foot in an extraterrestrial spacecraft or another dimension or anything like that. It's just these crazy stories from people that claim this happened to them. And while many of these stories are very quickly cast aside as absolute hoax, not true, not accurate, there's one abduction story that is universally regarded as the most believable and most famous alien abduction story, and that is of Travis Walton. What made this case so famous is that unlike all of the other alien abduction cases where there was never any proof, it was usually one person's firsthand account. In this case, you have a full-scale police investigation. You have up to 16 lie detector tests that were taken by Travis Walton himself, along with the other witnesses and people that were there. And you have a group of 6 level-headed guys that actually witnessed the abduction take place and have stuck to their story and have passed all lie detector tests and have never changed their story in 40 years. And you would think that at some point you might change your story because they came under incredible scrutiny. I mean, it basically derailed most of their careers and their lives because they were labeled as crazy people for believing that a UFO had abducted Travis Walton. I mean, in a way, they became famous, but in all the worst ways. So you have all these elements that make this story seem fairly credible. And even if this wasn't an alien abduction, let's say, how do you account for the past lie detector tests that are talking about UFOs? How do you account for the fact that Travis Walton was really missing for 5 days and has no idea where he was? And there was a full search effort to find him in the area where he would have been. So lots of unanswered questions, but the story itself of when he was actually abducted, and then his own story about what happened once he had been abducted, it makes for just an incredible story. It's been converted into books and movies, and to this day, it remains one of, if not the single most fascinating purported alien abduction stories ever. But before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3 to 4 of these stories every week. So if that's something that interests you, I would encourage you to gently extirpate the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's dive into the story. By 1975, Travis Walton, who was 22 years old at the time, had developed a bad boy reputation in his hometown of Snowflake, Arizona. You know, he rode a noisy Harley-Davidson motorcycle through town. He was a wild bull rider, and he was a boxer. And there was a story about Travis when he was with his friends in a car and they were driving down this road and a bear jumped out of the woods and landed in the middle of the road and was just standing there. And Travis, without any hesitation, leaps out of his car and chases after this huge bear and scares it into the woods, and in fact chased it up into the woods. So Travis was just known as this kind of rebel, problem child a little bit, but he was beloved by his friends. He was just like one of those cool guys that he did it his own way. So Travis and the 6 other men that he worked with were loggers. They were given contracts and they would go out and they would clear trees in a certain area. They were not big time with huge equipment to do this. We're talking chainsaws, saw and regular saws and axes. And they would just go out, these blue collar, like hard working type guys, and they would clear areas of trees. That's what they did. Now, these 7 men, they did a dangerous job. I mean, you're cutting down these huge trees and you're usually working pretty quickly. You're operating, chainsaws that are pretty dangerous. And Mike Rogers, who was the crew boss, who was there the day of this event, he described in a number of his interviews that, the men that he hired to do these jobs, they needed to be incredibly level-headed. They did not strike you as people that would have this fantastical, alien encounter story. On November 5th, 1975, Mike Rogers was given a contract to clear out this huge 1,200-acre plot of land inside of the Sitgreaves National Forest. And he grabbed his crew, they piled into the one pickup truck that Mike owned, and Mike knew that this was going to be a really difficult job. It was a huge area to cover, and he told his men up front, we're going to be working really hard, so expect long, full days. And so over the first 3 days of the job, even though they were working, long hours and barely taking any breaks, they were behind schedule. At the end of this 3rd day, it's late at night, they've worked all day, and everybody is just totally exhausted. And so finally they wrap up, and they all pile back into Mike's truck, all 7 of them, and they start driving the access road back down to the main road to get back to the town. And as they're driving, they're not really talking about work at all. They're kind of joking about what they're going to do that night. And as they're driving down the road, and again, it's heavily forested, they look off to the right, and there is some lights in the forest. They would say in interviews that they all noticed it, but it did not stand out as anything particularly bad. It just could be anything. They weren't thinking about it. But as they were driving down this road and this light, I guess, got brighter, or maybe they couldn't help but notice it, they all started commenting on this light, and they're looking at it, and somebody suggested that, it's probably just the moon, it's a full moon. But then one of the guys on the other side of the truck happened to look out his side, away from where that light was, and he goes, no, the moon's over here, it's on this side of the road. So they're like, okay, it's not the moon. And then someone suggested, maybe it's a forest fire. Like, maybe we should go check it out, that could be a forest fire. But then Mike Rogers, the driver, the crew boss, was like, no, there'd be smoke, there's no smoke or anything. And Travis, who, he's the guy that's jumping out of cars to go chase down bears, and he's like a total kind of adrenaline junkie type. He's like, hey, let's just drive over there and see what it is. Like, I don't know, it could be anything. Let's go check it out. The guys in the truck were a little on edge about it, but ultimately said, what's the harm? We'll drive over. We know there's a road that brings us over to that section of the forest. We'll get a look at whatever this is, and then we'll leave. So they drive down this other little access road, and they come to a clearing where these lights were, and they are astounded at what they see. They were all polygraphed separately about what they saw when they reached this clearing. Each of them described the same thing with slightly different details because it's from their own perspective. And the polygraph tests all showed that they were telling the truth. They saw this disc-shaped craft with what looked like panels of lights on the underside, hovering in a clearing, maybe 50 or 100 feet off the ground, not spinning or anything, just floating in midair, as if it was suspended. And the men, in their interviews later on TV shows and books, they would say what struck them was not just the fact that there's this craft here, but how bizarre it was to see this thing defying gravity. It's not moving, but it's hovering over the air, and it's right in front of us. And one of the men even commented at length, because he would build houses, and he was a handy guy. And he started talking about the structural framework of this craft. He could see that there was really impressive engineering on the underside of this craft. It was just a beautiful, beautiful machine. And they're looking at it, and Travis is so excited when they get to this clearing. He doesn't even know what he's looking at, but much like the bear, where he jumps out and chases the bear, as soon as they were almost at a stop in this clearing right next to the ship, he's jumping out of the car. Nobody else is, just Travis. And he starts walking just a little ways away from the car towards this craft. The craft doesn't move. The craft is maybe from where they parked, maybe 50 or 100 feet away from them, and then 50 or 100 feet in the air. And the crew doesn't say anything. They're just dumbfounded by what they're looking at. Travis is also dumbfounded, but he's walking towards the ship. And he would say in an interview that he was frightened, but he was mostly curious. He knew he was looking at something that no one knew what it was. Some sort of craft, they didn't know what it was, but it was fascinating to him, and he kept walking closer and closer and closer to it. And as the crew kind of came out of their initial shock of seeing this unidentified flying object in the sky, they start yelling for Travis to come back. They had this bad sense that something was going to happen, and they thought, you shouldn't go near it, like, come back. Not to mention it's hovering in the air. What if it falls and it lands on you? Like, hey, Travis, come back over here. And then it was like once one person started yelling for Travis to come back, they all did. And so Travis remembered hearing them screaming for him to come back to the car. But he's not really paying any attention. He's still walking. And finally he stops. He's just looking at it. And Travis would say he was just struck at just the beauty of the underside of this craft with all these different panels of lights built into it. It was this incredible piece of machinery. And he's looking at it, and then all of a sudden it starts spinning. Just a little bit, and it starts emitting this noise that all of them reported hearing, this loud mechanical sound. And now the yells from the crew are getting louder and louder, and Travis would say that he knew he needed to turn around and go back, but he just wanted to look for a few more seconds, and he was about to turn and go back to the truck when all of a sudden a beam of light comes out and strikes Travis like a lightning strike. And all of the crew saw this happen. He gets blown 20 feet away. Like, he gets lifted off the ground and thrown 20 feet. And they watched it happen. And again, in all of their polygraph tests, they all said the same thing. All passed. He was hit by a ray of light from this UFO, knocked him 20 feet back. Mike Rogers, in a panic, along with everybody else in the crew, they just decide to leave. And they're convincing themselves, as Mike is driving away like a maniac, leaving Travis behind, they're convincing themselves that he's dead already. We just watched him get shot by something. We don't know what that is. And they're freaked out. They don't even know what they saw. They're crying. They're hysterical. These are grown men, just absolutely terrified. And they're driving a little ways until finally Mike just hits the brakes and he stops. And Mike is like, we have to go back for him. He was like, if you guys want to stay here and wait for me, that's fine. But this truck is going back to get Travis. And so the idea of waiting out in the open after seeing what they just saw was even worse than going back. They wanted to stay together. So a little bit begrudgingly, although they knew they needed to, they all got back in the truck, turned around and started driving back up to the UFO site. As they make it back up, they notice that there is no lights up there. The craft is gone and there's no Travis. And they get out, and now Mike is uncontrollably crying because he feels like they just abandoned him, and where did he go? Everybody else is in shock. They can't believe it. They start screaming for Travis. They're running around the woods, yelling for Travis, looking for signs of Travis. They really don't know what happened, but they know Travis is not here. And after a little bit of time of looking, they're like, we have to tell the police. And they knew that it was going to be bad for them when they told police. The story is a UFO came and zapped Travis and now he's gone. That doesn't really sit well with police. But they knew, because they wanted to find Travis and they were very concerned about their friend, they knew they had to tell police. Mike and a few of the other crew were just unable to even think. They were crying, they were upset, and so finally they get to a payphone, the first payphone they saw, because this is 1975, and Ken Peterson, who was this very kind of simple, matter-of-fact guy, recently married, just very simple guy, very level-headed guy. He decides to call the police because he's the only one who was, I guess, composed enough to do it. And so he calls the sheriff's department and he says, you got to come out here. We can't find our friend Travis Walton. We'll have to describe it to you when you get here, because trying to do it over the phone is not going to do it justice. But he's gone and we don't know where he went. So shortly thereafter, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and Ken Copeland, their partners, they show up at this rest stop where this payphone was, and they get to the scene. They see Ken Peterson, who made the call to them, and they're like, all right, tell us what's going on. The crew has now gotten out of the truck. They look distraught for sure. And Ken begins to try to describe what happened, but he hasn't said UFO, he hasn't said aliens, he's just said, we were up at the logging site, we had a contract up there, and then, just, it's hard to describe, and Mike Rogers jumps in, he's like, we saw a UFO, and a ray of light hit Travis, and then he disappeared. And the sheriffs are looking at them like, really? And so they stopped them and were like, all right, I need to search your truck to make sure you guys aren't under the influence of something. And they're like, we haven't done anything. We've been working all day. They search the truck, nothing. They check each of them to see if they're sober, and their field test showed they were all sober. And the Sheriff Gillespie, who was the overall in charge sheriff, even though he was a total skeptic, and so was Sheriff Copeland as well, he would say about that first engagement with the 6 crew members that they were obviously shaken up by something. Something had happened. They don't know what it was, but they were shaken up. And what Sheriff Gillespie believed was that they were creating a hoax to cover up a real crime. He believed that they had harmed Travis Walton and they were using a UFO to cover it up. But he also was thinking to himself, like, this is a bad hoax. It's not very well planned. They don't really have their stories really lined up particularly well. They're not doing a good job explaining it. The only thing they're doing well is acting scared. A couple hours later, the sun's starting to come up because it was super late when all this happened. And Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copeland have organized this huge search effort up in the forest where Travis had gone missing. And the crew members, they're all there as well. A bunch of volunteers showed up and they are scouring the area. I mean, they got dogs out, they got these huge teams looking everywhere, and they can't come up with anything. I mean, they're looking everywhere, there's no sign, there's nothing. There's nothing from Travis. And so while this is all going on, Sheriff Copeland and Sheriff Gillespie have started coming over to Mike Rogers and the rest of the crew and being like, hey, if you just tell us where Travis Walton's body is, like, we'll go easy on you guys. Like, we know you did it. And they can feel that the pressure is really mounting, that if they don't find Travis, even though they didn't do anything, according to their story, they're going to face serious repercussions, because that's the way the world works. You don't get to say aliens did this and not have any blame placed on you, because there's no proof. They just have their own eyewitness testimony. That's it. And so the crew has started to become very worried about what's going to happen. They're worried about Travis, of course, but they're starting to see that, like, they're going to be prosecuted for this unless they find Travis. And so they're all very stressed out. And they noticed during the search, this first day of searching, that these 3 guys wearing red jackets had these tools that were scanning the ground, almost like a metal detector. And Mike Rogers, he was hoping that during this investigation that they would have people come out that were like paranormal investigators. I guess maybe he was naive to think that the police would actually do that. But he thought, given the fact that we've all said this is a UFO that zapped Travis, who then disappeared, that they would have at least one person representing the kind of paranormal side of the investigation coming out. And so he sees these guys in red with their special tools that seem like a metal detector, and his gut says they're paranormal investigators. And so Mike goes over to them and he's like, hey, what are these tools you guys are doing? Like, what is this? And they look at him and they're like, oh, well, this tests for radiation. We're scanning for radiation in the area. And he asked them, like, well, what group are you guys with? Are you with the sheriff's department? And they just didn't really answer him. They said, oh, we're just checking for radiation in the area. That's just what we do. And Mike sees an opportunity, because when that ship emitted that ray of light that ultimately blew Travis Walton 20 feet and then, evaporated him or something, they were within range of that big ball of lightning, and they were very much in the kind of cone where, had there been radiation coming off of that ship, he believed that perhaps they would have been hit with it. And so he asked the guys with the red jackets on and their little radiation tools to scan the crew's jackets and bodies to see if they were radioactive. And so the crew comes over and they scan them, and there's nothing. There's no trace elements of radioactivity. They're like, no, there's nothing. And then Mike realizes that from the time they called the sheriff until this search, they had all the crew gone home and changed, then come out to do this search. And so he thought, well, then, any of the radioactive materials would have been on our clothes, which aren't here, but we have our hard hats in the back of the truck that were out here the whole time. They were potentially exposed to whatever was out there from the ship. Can you test those? And so he brought over one of their helmets, and the guy in red scans his helmet, and the ticker goes all the way over, fully radioactive. And the guy in red looked up at Mike and looked down at the helmet, and he's scanning it, and he's looking at him, kind of trying to size him up. And then he turns and he kind of gestures at the other two in red and tells them to stop doing what they're doing. And they come over and they're scanning the helmets as well. And then, without any indication of what the results were, what this meant, because Mike is kind of waiting for them to tell them what's going to happen, the guys in red just turn around and say, okay. And they just start walking away. And Mike's like, well, wait, what does this mean? And they don't turn around, and they just walk away from the search site. And so the other crew are watching this happen too, and Mike and the crew are trying to get them to come back, but they're not turning around, they're just leaving, and then they're gone. And so Mike goes over to the sheriffs, who they know the sheriffs think they did something to Travis. These are not their friends, but they figured we need to ask them who those guys in red were. So they go over to Sheriff Gillespie and they're like, hey, who were those guys in red jackets with the radiation detectors? And Sheriff Gillespie's like, who? There's no one here looking for radiation. Everyone here is here because I ordered them to be here. Who are they? Where are they? And he was like, well, they just walked over there. They went around the corner there. And Sheriff Gillespie's like, well, I didn't order them there. And it would turn out that they couldn't locate these three people. No one knew who they were. Mike went around and asked anybody who seemed like an authority figure if they knew who these people were. They asked people if they had interacted with them, and no one knew. So after this search that goes on for a couple of days, turns up nothing. There's no sign of Travis. The town of Snowflake, Arizona really turned on the 6 crew members. Everybody believed that they had done something to Travis, that this UFO thing was a hoax and that they harmed Travis and they were using this as a cover-up. And the sheriff department, they really perpetuated that. They were pretty open about, this is not a UFO situation, this is not an alien abduction, this is a missing person case, and frankly, we believe the UFO thing is a hoax. National and international media had picked this story up, and it became this massively viral story all over the world. And news media outlets are converging on Snowflake, Arizona, and they're inundating the sheriff's department with requests for more information about this alien abduction, and it's really frustrating the 2 sheriffs who were leading this investigation, Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland. And they were already skeptical and really upset about feeling like they were being taken advantage of by these crew members, this hoax, right? That's what they believed it was. And so Sheriff Gillespie and Copland decide, you know what? We're going to just cut through all the BS here, and we're going to make these boys take a lie detector test. So they go out and get one of the country's best polygraph examiners to come in and administer a lie detector test on each of the 6 crew members. And so one by one over the course of the day, each crew member was tested for 2 hours, same questions, all centering on the criminal side, the kind of foul play angle for Travis Walton. They all go through it. And it turned out that 5 of the 6 had all shown that they were telling the truth. And the 6th person, it was just inconclusive. It didn't mean that he was lying. It just meant that the test wasn't done very well. And this polygraph examiner had anywhere from a 92 to 98% accuracy rate. He was one of the best in the country. And he even would say, like, it would be so difficult to fake that. To have 5 people, let's say this is all a big hoax and they harmed Travis Walton. It would be almost impossible to have 5 people be able to pass my examination and have nobody slip up. They were telling the truth. And so the examiner tells the sheriff, and Sheriff Gillespie is dumbfounded because he believed that they were going to find out they were all lying and that this could just be a pure criminal investigation and it would be, let's go find Travis Walton's body. But now the examiner is saying they're telling the truth. And so Detective Gillespie and his partner are like, now what do we do? And then 5 days after Travis's disappearance, Travis shows back up. During numerous interviews, Travis would say that he remembers waking up on a road and he didn't recognize where he was, but it was nighttime, it was raining, and he sensed a very bright light above him. And so as he's laying, he kind of turns his head to look up into the sky and he sees what looks like the underside of that ship, because he remembered how struck he was by the beauty of the kind of engineering underneath that disc UFO they saw in the forest. It looked the same. His vision was not great, but he's looking up and he's pretty confident that's what he's looking at. And then it flies into the sky and it's gone. And he's left in total darkness on a road in some place he doesn't know. And he remembers standing up and feeling very weak and depleted and dehydrated. And he just knew that he had to get to civilization. He had to just go in a direction and find someone who could help him because he was so weak and he would die out there if he didn't find someone who could help. And so he musters the strength to stand up and he starts kind of staggering down the road. And eventually, through just adrenaline, he just starts running. And luckily, he sees up ahead there is a rest stop. And at rest stops, there's payphones. And he makes his way down and he goes to the payphone and he has change in his pocket still. He puts it in the payphone and he ends up calling his brother. And his brother he can't believe he's talking to Travis because Travis is probably supposed to be dead at this point. He didn't believe it was Travis, but Travis just said to him over and over again, "It's me. They brought me back." And he tells him where he is because now he recognizes that this rest stop is actually in Snowflake, Arizona. When his brother picks him up, Travis would say that he believed that this was just minutes after, the initial abduction. He didn't even know he had been abducted. This is like he's coming to and he's like, man, what happened? Like I was just over at that clearing where I saw this ship and now I'm over here. Like, what am I doing here? And so Travis's brother is looking at him like, where have you been? We've been so worried about you for the past several days. And Travis, who was kind of almost catatonic, he's in shock. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks at his brother and he's like, what do you mean days? And his brother's like, you've been missing for 5 days. And so Travis would say that when he heard this news, this revelation that he had been missing for 5 days, it absolutely put him into shock. He was in a catatonic state where he couldn't make sense of it. And so he just sat there quietly. And his brother's like looking at him, not really sure what to even ask. He asked a couple times what happened and Travis just didn't answer because he didn't know. He couldn't explain it. And so Travis's brother decides, instead of just immediately calling the police, I want to bring you to a hospital because clearly that needs to happen. And frankly, with the media circus, as soon as they find out you're back, it's just going to be mayhem. And I want to make sure you're taken care of first. So he drives to Phoenix, Arizona, and he brings him to a hospital. And he asks the doctors to be discreet, and he has a doctor do an examination. The doctor knew who Travis Walton was because he'd been following the news. And he's doing an examination of Travis, and he was malnourished and he was tired and looked very sick. But there was no physical wounds with the exception of he had one puncture site in his arm, in the crook of his arm. Travis was not a drug user, so it wasn't like that was, a mark from using drugs. It was a puncture site, and they assumed someone had recently put a needle in his arm. And also the doctor drug tested him and tested his blood, and there was no drugs in his system. It wasn't like he had been using any sort of substance. So he kind of had a clear bill of health, minus the injection site and looking pretty ragged. And so after the examination, Travis's brother brings Travis back to his home in Phoenix, Arizona. As soon as they get back, his home phone is getting constant phone calls. It had made its way to the sheriff's department back in Snowflake, Arizona, and they are nonstop calling Travis's brother. Like, hey, we hear he's back. We have to talk to him. We have to talk to him. Sheriff Gillespie, he drives all the way to Phoenix. He goes in and he sits down to talk to Travis. And Sheriff Gillespie would say that Travis looked like he was in shock. He looked like he had been through something traumatic. It did not seem like he was acting. And he starts asking Travis what happened. And Travis, he does mention the UFO. He mentions seeing this thing in a clearing. You know, he gets struck by some light. He doesn't know what it was. And then, you know, he's on the road 5 days later and he can't really make sense of what happened. He just didn't really know what happened over the 5 days. And finally, Sheriff Gillespie just kind of doesn't really give up. He's like, well, we have no way to arrest him. We have no proof of anything. And so we decided we're going to be in touch, and he drives back. And then media starts showing up. Huge news trucks start showing up outside. Everybody found out, because this was a huge story, where he was, and everybody wanted answers. Finally, the National Enquirer, they reached out and they said, hey, if you give us an exclusive story, if Travis speaks to us about what happened to him, we will get you out of here, we'll bring you to a private location, and we'll even pay to have Travis undergo a whole other battery of tests that are not typically done to see if they could figure out what had happened to him. And so they agree to go with the National Enquirer. So by the time he's actually sitting there looking at the National Enquirer, he's had a little bit of time to maybe let his memory kind of kick back in about what had happened. And he's having these flashes of memory of what happened over those 5 days. Because initially all he could remember was seeing the craft and then being on the road 5 days later. And so when he's sitting down with the National Enquirer people, he begins to recall what actually happened over those 5 days. And so this is what he said happened. He said that he remembers getting out of the truck and walking up to this craft. And he remembers his crew members yelling at him to come back. He knew they were yelling at him to come back. He just wanted to look at the craft a little bit longer. And then right as he was about to turn around and head back, the craft started moving. This loud kind of mechanical, eerie sound is being made. And before he had a chance to run back, he gets hit with this lightning bolt of some kind. Then he remembers being in the presence of some doctors. He saw white lab coats, masks, and facial coverings, and he's kind of in and out of consciousness, and he's, you know, this orange light around him, but he definitely sees what looks like medical professionals, and he's thinking to himself, whatever happened with that ship, it must have hurt me, and my crew must have scooped me up and brought me to the hospital. And so in his kind of in and out state, he's aware that he's around medical professionals, at least what he believes are medical professionals. And at some point, his vision clears. It goes from foggy and he's in and out to being pretty much lucid. And he looks down at his chest, and there's a rectangular box sitting on his chest that he didn't recognize. It didn't really look like modern medical equipment. It just looked like this almost like rock sitting on his chest. And he looks at that, and then he looks up at one of the people who's wearing a mask, who's working on him, one of the medical professionals. And this person is working on this box, and then the person looks at Travis Walton and then leans in to look even closer at Travis Walton, and Travis is horrified. It was this grayish, thin, narrow-headed figure that was very short, maybe like 4 feet high, who was looking in at him, and its eyes were like slits, and it's looking at Travis. And Travis, who's unbelievably scared at this point, pushes everything off of him and rips out all the cords that are attached to him. He kind of topples off of this table that he was on, and he realizes he's in a fairly small room, and there's 3 of these humanoid creatures in the room with him. And he picks up the biggest instrument he can see next to the table that he was just laying on. He didn't know what it was, and he starts kind of wildly waving it at them and screaming to leave him alone, like, get away from me. And he's trying to make sense of what he's looking at, and the 3 figures in lab coats start walking closer and closer to him. And they're just kind of looking up at him, trying to study him a little bit. They get all the way up to him, and he's waving, and he's almost about to hit one of them when they just kind of abruptly turn around and leave the room, leaving him alone in this kind of examination room. And as soon as they leave, he watches them go down the little, outside the door, down the little hallway, and they turn left. And so he's practically paralyzed with fear, but he knows if he can't get out of this room, he's done for. And so finally, he kind of gets himself together and he walks past the examination table. He goes down the hallway outside of the door, and instead of going left where they went, he kind of sneaks off to the right and starts walking. And he comes to another room, and it's a room that has a single chair in it. It's this tiny little room with a chair, and the chair is turned away from him. He begins to peer around the chair and he sees that no one is sitting there. So he goes in front of the chair and he's like touching the wall, looking for a doorknob or any sort of mechanism that can get him out of this room. And he said like the room, it was like this perfectly flat. Everything was flat and smooth. There was no door handles. He couldn't find a way out. And he ultimately sees on the chair that it looks like there's some buttons on the chair itself. And he pushes all these buttons on the chair and nothing happens. And then in the doorway where he came in, suddenly a person, a man appears in the doorway who's wearing what looks like a spacesuit, like an astronaut suit. And Travis is so immediately relieved, even though the weirdness of him being in an astronaut suit is pretty high. But he's like, it's a human. And he doesn't know what to think about the fact that he's now excited to see a human, right? Like it's terrifying that you were just around these non-humans, but he's like in panic mode now. He sees another human being and he runs over to him and he says, please, you gotta help me. I don't know where I am. Where are we? What is this? What's going on? And he notices that the eyes of this person inside of the spacesuit, it's a man who at least looks like a man, but his eyes are distant. He's not making eye contact with Travis. It's like he's in a trance. And he said his eyes just seemed off, like they weren't focused on him. It would be like if you're talking to someone, but they were like permanently looking away from you. There was just something off about him and he never spoke. And so he's trying to ask this guy, like, where are we? And the guy takes him by the arm and he just starts leading him back into the hall where he came from and continued down the hall, not back towards the room where he was originally, but down the hall in the other direction.
We'll never be apart.
And they get to another door and he opens it up and Travis the whole time is like pleading with this guy to help him. And he thinks that this guy is helping him. He thinks that this is his savior. And he feels relieved that a human being, albeit a strange human being, is helping him. And eventually he stops asking him any questions because the guy in the spacesuit's just not reacting to him. They open this door and they go down into this huge hangar where there's all these spacecraft that look just like the one that he saw in the clearing, that Travis saw in the clearing. And they start walking down between all these spacecraft that are just hovering, much like they were hovering in the forest, seemingly able to just defy gravity. And the whole time, this guy in the spacesuit's saying nothing, and Travis is like, what is this? What are these craft? Is this military? Saying nothing. They walk to the far side of the hangar and they open up another door and they go into this bright white room, and there's 3 more human-like people with the strange eye thing going on in spacesuits that are standing there next to another medical table, and they're looking not at Travis, but their bodies are aimed in the direction of the door they came in through. Travis goes in and he sees these 3 and he thinks, these people are here to save me. Like, again, I feel relieved to see humans, albeit strange humans, but nonetheless humans. And the guy who had brought him in there continues to lead him over to the 3 other people. and they pick him up and they put him on the table, and he starts kind of resisting because he doesn't know what they're doing. They're not speaking. He's like, "What are you doing?" And they force him onto this table, and he's feeling pretty weak at this point, and they take a gas mask and they put it over his face, and then he blacks out. And his next memory after that is when he woke up on the road and had the light above him that flew away, and he had to run down to the payphone to call his brother. Travis did not immediately go and speak to the crew members that were there that night. It took quite a bit of time. He was talking to press. He was, doing interviews. The police wanted to talk to him. There's a lot going on. But he eventually got together with the other 6 crew members, and they all met up at Mike Rogers, the crew boss's house. And they just said, "You got to tell us what happened." And so he sits down and he tells the story. All of them believed him. They didn't want to believe him, but they believed him because they saw the first half of this story. They saw it for themselves. And once he was done telling it, they didn't really have that many questions. They just felt bad. They felt like if they had just stayed there and taken Travis, he wouldn't have been taken, but they didn't know that. And so all of them would leave Mike's house that day, and they would all go their separate ways. They did not stay in touch. They went their separate ways. It was like this hugely traumatic event that even to this day, 40 plus years later, when they talk about it, they're often brought to tears. Ken Peterson, his interviews are particularly striking because when he talks about it, he's an older man now. And he says, to this day, I'm scared to look out my window because I'm afraid I'm going to see a spaceship. And he starts crying when he talks about it. I mean, this had a profound impact on these 7 men. And some of them didn't do so well. This whole story, it ruined their credibility. Even though this is the most believable alien abduction story, the truth is most people think it's a hoax. One of them, like his own family, basically disowned him because they felt so embarrassed about this whole story. They don't believe him. So if this was a hoax, like to what end? What did they get out of it? Nothing. It damaged their lives. Following this case over the span of 40 years, there would be 16 lie detector tests taken, 5 by Travis Walton and 11 by the remaining crew, and they would all pass. The one member of that initial polygraph set, when 5 had passed and 1 was inconclusive, he was retested, the same exact test, and he did pass. It's just one of those things where we're left with this incredible story where modern technology says they're telling the truth, but we can't fit that truth into what we think of as normal life. And so we've just decided that there's going to be a group of people that believe and there's going to be a group of people that don't. And you're left to pick which side you're on. So I'd love to hear what side you sit on. Was this a hoax? Was this an abduction, or was this something else? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you. And if you haven't already, please gently extirpate the like button and then also subscribe to my channel, turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my 3 to 4 weekly uploads every week. If you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is MrBallen. That's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.